Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Our guest for this episode is Harvey Gold, and this is actually part two with Harvey. In the first part, we discussed his musical beginnings and upbringing and his early band days, and then his work with the band Tin Huey, very legendary band here from Akron. And we kind of took it up to the point where Tin Huey, their record deal kind of fell through after their one great album on the Warner Brothers label. And they basically kind of split up a little bit, but then kind of got together again as well. And I thought we'd kind of pick the story up from that point where most of you guys had kind of moved away from Akron. And so, as I recall, you ended up in Woodstock, New York, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Ralph Carney, I mentioned this before, Ralph Carney had wanted to move to Woodstock to as a jazz musician to work at the Creative Music Studio with Carl Berger and Don Cherry and Anthony Braxton.
Right, real avant-garde jazz musicians.
Yeah. It was a great place. And that was in Hurley, I think, West Hurley, which is, if there's such a thing as a suburb of Woodstock. So we ended up moving there, and it was a fascinating time to be there. Michael and Stewart and I recorded some stuff. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, Michael and Stewart and I are talking about getting together to re-record a couple tunes that we did on an old TAC 3340 with crap mics that never could be mixed to go with some of the other stuff that the Hueys never released. And then we had some help on bass from our pal Frank Campbell, Blank Frank. And then, we reconfigured some. We did a couple of tours. Woodstock was a really interesting period.
You ended up working in Woodstock.
I did. Well, I started out working for Todd Rundgren. He had a video studio called Utopia Video that was in Studio B, I think, up at Albert Grossman's studio up on the mountain, Bearsville, recording. And Albert built a structure to house Utopia Video across the parking lot from his famous restaurant, The Little Bear. Albert sort of owned Woodstock for the most part when he was there. Just as a note, Albert was Bob Dylan's manager.
Right, sure.
Did a lot of major stuff. But at any rate, I went to work for Todd for a while, and that's where I got to meet Ray Davies, which was great. I'm going to apologize to the Summit's resident ghost, Jim Chenot, who argued with me that it is pronounced Davis. Ray Davis. It is. I met Ray Davis and tried to drive him to the train station and eventually succeeded. It was a pretty great period of time. And then, but it was a strange experience. The video studio never really had a proper identity, whether it was really there to produce videos for people or whether it was Todd's toy. And it was all done on videotape and all using chroma key in the studio.
Okay.
Which is matting, keying backgrounds on everything.
I see. Okay.
It was just at the real early period of cutting-edge video, and so it was awkward, and it was clumsy. And ultimately...
were you kind of learning on the job?
I was, that whole period of my life was going back to college, because I learned what I learned there, but it was very limited. But his production manager, ended up becoming like my best friend, who passed away a couple of years ago, Bob Lampel, who also... would get these midnight calls from Europe saying, Zappa's on tour and he needs you to come light it because things have gone crazy. He was a lighting designer and a production person. He ended up forming a production company in New York called BLTV, and ultimately I ended up moving down to the city and working with him, and that was when I felt like I'd gone back to college. college.
Right.
Because I really learned a lot about film. Once Bob suggested to Todd that he might want to shoot something on 16 millimeter, and Todd came incredibly close to firing him on the spot for suggesting we would not be using 1-inch videotape.
Right.
At any rate, and then I actually, it's a job that's not that significant from a rock and roll standpoint, but I ended up working at a deli called the Corner Cupboard right in the middle of Woodstock for a while. And it was an interesting thing, making sandwiches for the Isley Brothers while they were recording up at Bearsville. And I made more than a couple of chili dogs and sold more than a couple of 40s of Colt 45 to Rick Dink. And everybody came in. Bob Dylan's ex-wife trying to cash in food stamps. I mean, Susie Ronson coming down from the hill. I mean, it was a pretty interesting place to live. Very eclectic, and I loved it. But then I had to go down to the city and pursue film and video.
Okay, right. And so that ended up...
because Tin Huey had done that version of Tin Huey with Ralph and Ralph. We had done a couple of tours. We had done some small tours of East Coast and back in Kent and Cleveland. And we'd gotten to a point there where, we've done enough demos and we've sent out enough and we've had enough, semi-rejections.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Do 3 more. That's good. Do 3 more. It's like, I'll make a career doing demos. Where E-Boy moved back down to Manhattan, and that's when I moved down to Manhattan, or thereabouts.
Speaking of video, this is going back in time just a little bit, but the band that I was in at the time, Unit 5, we did play with Tin Huey one time, and that was at the legendary Bank nightclub, which we will talk about in a future episode at length. But
that was a big gig.
That was a huge gig. The place was absolutely packed. I'd never seen it so full.
Fire department showed up on that one.
Yes, yeah, it was definitely breaking some regulations, I think. But you guys weren't you doing a video for English Kids?
We shot the video for I'm a Believer there.
Oh, I'm a Believer. Okay.
We did a video for English Kids at Irving Plaza in Manhattan.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. It was like, that was a very close to Devo universe. It was Michael's wife, Susan, who was known as Susan Devo.
Right.
Bobby Whitaker, who was known as Bobby Devo. And Bill Whitaker, who was their original drummer, I think.
Right.
They shot us doing I'm a Believer at the Bank. And that video's out on YouTube.
Yeah. I just remember it was funny because we played... I think Chai Pig played too.
It's possible.
And then, but then you guys came out, but you kind of did like a short set, but then you basically did I'm a Believer like 5 times. and wanted the crowd all to be hyped up.
And it was great. I was like, okay, we got to do it again. Dance harder.
Anyway, that was a fun night.
It was a fun night.
So
actually, I think we played 2 nights. And that's why it might have been you guys one night and Chai Pig the other night.
That sounds right.
We had just been coming off tour.
Right.
So we were actually playing pretty good.
So, okay, getting back to New York. So at this point, you are doing video work there, and that kind of becomes kind of like phase 2 of your life, right? You kind of got away from music, and we're really working in the world of video and show business.
When I moved down to Manhattan, that was pretty much the end of what I thought was the end of my musical career. One of the interesting things that happened that I really, really cherished was I was producing a 22 episodes of a series that was on Comedy Central called 2 Drink Minimum, which was a combination stand-up comedy and vignette, pre-taped vignette thing, hosted by Jake Johansson, which is where I originally met Mark Maron, because he came in to be on the show. But that was from a conversation in the parking lot, folks.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that I'm the producer, so there are many things that I'm allowed to do. So we decided that we were going to design it to have a band on stage behind a scrim, a theatrical scrim. And when people were introduced, it would be lit from behind, so you'd be able to see the band. And when they got on stage, the lighting would come from the front, which would go to whatever the design was on the scrim. Mm-hmm. So I got to hire my pal, my best buddy, Chris Butler, to be my music director. Okay. And he picked a guitar player and a bass player. Chris played drums. And we flew Ralph in from San Francisco to play sax.
Okay. Huh.
And various other things that one blows. And that was a great experience, having the boys with me as my music guys while I was producing this show. Mm-hmm. That was kind of a highlight.
Well, that is interesting.
How many episodes?
22.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And then you worked on other shows as well.
I was a line producer for a whole bunch, and then I was a co-producer the year that we won an award, by chance, of Caroline's Comedy Hour, which was, we did 117 episodes on A&E.
Okay.
I got to be the technical director for a long-form documentary that got an Academy Award nomination, which was on Adam Clayton Powell, the congressman from Harlem. Mm-hmm. I'm just mentioning the things that had integrity. And then I also did a technical director on a documentary that was on PBS, on American Masters, on the Negro Ensemble Company.
Okay.
And then after I had done all this stuff and moved back to Akron, I get a call from Patrick Carney, who's like, well, we're going to do a video with David Cross directing in New York. Can you go back to New York and produce it? Uh-huh. And I did. And it was the video that we did for 10 a.m. Automatic, which was
the Black Keys, of course.
The Black Keys, which was a very goofy ass music video, which I loved.
So tell me, this was your production company in New York? And the name of it was?
Well, Gold Teleproductions. Yeah. When I was with BLTV, BLTV got into a little bit of financial trouble when the famous and well-documented Tommy Mottola, former president of Sony Records, as the manager of Hall & Oates, approved all these things that were going to be overages on the video Say It Isn't So. Ideas that the director had, or Daryl had, or John had. And Bob, my boss on that, would call Tommy and go, listen, they want to do this, but it's going to cost more. Is it okay? He would tell him how much it would probably cost. And Tommy would be like, yeah, go ahead and do it. They didn't pay for it. So that eventually there was a settlement, but that was enough years later that it kind of caused BLTV to be working out of a hole all the time. And Bob finally closed the doors. At that point in time, I was the production coordinator, and we were doing tons and tons and tons of shoots we had been doing tons of shoots for our most primary client, which was MTV Networks.
Okay.
So we were shooting all this stuff, which was fabulous. It was way more rock and roll life than being in Tin Huey, I'll tell you that. But at any rate, when BLTV closed its doors, I said, listen, let me scrape together what I can. Let me rent your gear that we've been using, and let me continue the client base. And I called it Gold Teleproductions. So we were providers of production services, camera guys, sound guys, gear, shooting stuff, handing it over, figuring it out issues.
That's why Patrick called you, besides being a friend. But he knew that you had that kind of a...
Well, he also knew that I was a producer. That was the other part of the thing, where I was producing these comedy shows, and there was a series of shows on Comedy Central called Pulp Comics. So I produced pieces with like Laura Keitlinger, and I think we did one with my friend Dave Attell. And
you worked with Jon Stewart too, didn't you?
Well, doing Caroline's Comedy Hour was like a golden age, which none of us knew it was a golden age
of comedy, of stand-up
comedy. I mean, everybody ran through us, and this is in the 90s, and Jon Stewart was one of my writers. Louis C.K. came on to write for us. Susie Essman, who's in the Larry David Show.
Yeah,
Susie was one of our writers. Jonathan Katz was a writer for us during a period where our host was Richard Jeni, which is like oil and water. And Jonathan came up to me and was like, Harvey, I got a call from Comedy Central, and they want to do a show called Dr. Katz, and I've got a contract with you. And I was like, Jonathan, turn around, look at that door, don't turn back. He got released from his deal the moment he opened his mouth. But, we had hosts of, our first host was Carol Leifer, our second host was Colin Quinn, who I had absolutely the best time in the world with. And then our third host was Richard Jeni, may he rest in peace. And you name them, they were on the show. Ray Romano was on the show. Chris Rock did a set. I mean, everybody did a set.
Right.
Everybody did their 7 minutes. Whether they had 7 minutes or not, they did it. And it was wonderful. It was a great experience. And to this day, I'm happy where I am now, but I lament the fact that it really did seem like stand-up comedy being so entertaining and so cheap for the network to produce would be. I mean, we would pre-produce roll-in pieces and stuff, but still, it was, it was affordable. I thought it would go on forever,
right?
And it turned out that it was a combination of saturation, and people ran out of material. I have a friend, John Manfrolotti, who was on the Ray Romano Show. He was on a number of shows, who did a really funny set. And then we hired him to do warm-up for us. And he's done a lot of acting. And one day after we had done 3 or 4 seasons, I said, hey, John, why don't you come on and do another set? And he's like, Harvey, I shot my wad. And it was like he only had a tight 7, and then he would just work the audience all the time. So it was a pretty wonderful period of time.
So I am Bob Ethington, and I'm here with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and we have our special guest Harvey Gold, local music legend. I was okay. He is a legend,
living legend.
You guys.
And we're talking about his career, and we did his early music stuff and his work with the band Tin Huey, and then his work in video production in New York City after that. But you ended up back in Akron, and you've ended up doing a lot of music since then. And in this sense, I have to interject myself because I've kind of overlapped with you on a lot of these projects.
Bob Ethington is Harvey Gold's drummer of the 21st century. It's on everything.
And it kind of started with Ralph Carney coming into town. He used to do that usually around September or October every year to visit family. And he wanted to do a little show at the Beachland Tavern. And it was Ralph Carney and friends. And I had always remained, I knew these guys. I particularly knew Ralph, though, from my days.
So the rest of us,
music.
Bob was the kid from Unit 5.
Yeah, Ralph and I were a little closer in age. That's probably the true. And so he asked me if I'd like to play percussion, and it was going to be very typical Ralph thing where it was very improvisational, and I think he just came up with 3 or 4 little goofy riffs or whatever, and we were just going to jam on those. And it really turned out to be sort of a semi-Tin Huey reunion, because other than me, it was Stu Austin played drums, and Mike Elward was there on guitar, and Chris Butler was Chris there?
No, Chris wasn't there, but I ended up going back and forth between bass and keyboards.
And bass and keyboards, yeah. And I always liked it. I mentioned this gig because the Black Keys opened for us that night. So it was just, it's funny. That's one of those things I was able to like tell my mother, and she actually thought it was impressive. You know,
it was like
they opened for us once.
Gig,
you know,
I think.
Yeah, it was so. It was like the second or third gig of the Black Keys, but they actually opened for this group at the beachside. It wasn't even the
it was the tavern, not the ballroom.
It wasn't the ballroom.
No,
and there weren't that many people there.
No.
My wife and I were there, but we weren't married at the time. We were friends, and this is what you got to interpret this for me. On Instagram a few weeks ago, I saw that the Black Keys had a special release on vinyl of that gig. And Bob, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was on. I think you could only get it online, and it was like a limited edition thing.
That night,
yeah,
and
it's available.
I believe it's that night. Yes, it's in. It was. I'm guessing that Dan or somebody recorded that show, but so it's not us. It's just the Black Keys.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's there. Yeah.
What?
And,
I'm appalled.
I know.
That's interesting. Yeah. I do remember. I had no idea what they were doing, and as a matter of fact, I was really shocked because Patrick was far more like a Pavement guy, right? And Patrick was not a drummer. I mean, I knew Little Pat from the family. And they played, and I remember thinking, holy cow, that's really good.
Well, I remember seeing him when he played in a band called Church Builder, and he played keyboards.
Yeah.
It was either for Jonathan Richman or Peru, but they opened. But
really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Neat.
But anyway, so at that point, after doing those shows, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Harvey, because you'll know more about it than me, but you guys kind of decided to kind of re-up Tin Huey, and I was invited to join as a percussionist in the band and sort of augmented. Speaking of Pavement, I was kind of like Bob Nastanovich because I was playing snare and floor tom but bongos and what have you. So,
yeah. I think what actually happened, as I recall, Chris Butler got a call. I mean, he knew we had done this.
Yeah.
But he got a call from Meredith Rutledge, who was a curator at the Rock Hall. And they wanted to do a Northeast Ohio punk show. And once again, Tin Huey gets categorized really accurately. She wanted to know if Tin Huey would headline it, get it back together and headline it. So Chris came in from New York, and we brought Mark in from and Ralph in from the San Francisco area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bizarro's played that gig too.
It was you, it was us.
The Pagans.
Did you guys play that one? No, you guys did the one with. You guys did the one with. It was half Cleveland. You guys and the Numbers Band.
No, not that night. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the one where you brought Ralph in. There was a two nights of all the Ohio bands, like music. The music.
Oh.
That's the one I think.
Well, the night we did, it was us, the Pagans, and the Pink Holes.
Right. Yeah.
And it was a hilarious gig, as you might recall.
Yes.
Because after soundcheck, it was sort of like how The Who, when they had John's Children, which was Mark Bolan's band, open for them, were so jacked up over how crazy John's Children got that they started the first song with like Substitute and wrecked their gear. So they kicked them off the tour. But Chris was like, maybe we should start with the Stooges songs. And I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. So we opened the show with Captain Beefheart's When It Blows It Stacks, and all these people who are like dressed for weekend punks are they've just watched the Pagans and the Pink Holes. They're looking at us, like staring at us. I mean, we're really loud and we're really fast, and we're doing When It Blows It Stacks with Ralph Carney, not knowing most of the lyrics, just going, when it blows it stacks. And then we went on and continued our set, and people just sort of wandered off and were walking around the Rock Hall and not paying that much of attention. And then we brought John Petkovic up to sing with us as we had planned to do I Want to Be Your Dog. So we start I Want to Be Your Dog. And this was another thing I did backstage. Not even all the guys in the band knew I was going to do this. But we did I Want to Be Your Dog. And as we're doing it, it's like that movie Rock and Roll High School where all of a sudden all of the punks' ears stand up and they're like, what's going on here? And you see them coming down the escalator and coming in from having cigarettes. And they come around the stage. And then we finished I Want to Be Your Dog. And because it was an old Stooges song that Tin Huey always played, I went straight into the opening riff of TVI, which is a Savage song.
Yeah.
And we did TVI, and, it was like, oh, great. We were a big hit as long as we weren't Tin Huey.
It was really funny.
But it was fun.
It was a very funny night, though, because it's exactly how Harvey describes it. It was like we come on, and by our third song, it's like, where is everybody? And you know how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has that basement area where you go down, and it was like they were all down there. They were like trying to get as far away from us as possible. And then once we go to 3 Chords and the Truth with the Stooges, they're all back and they loved us. So it was a funny night.
It reminded me at the end, and I got a little bit of attitude towards the audience at the end, like you guys are a bunch of whatever, because when the Hueys were originally on tour, when we were on Warner Brothers, we played a gig at the Mud Club. And it was funny because the Mud Club was like the coolest place at the time. And we played our set, and we were really good that night, and the reaction was kind of mediocre. And then we went upstairs thinking, okay, now we're going to have something to eat, and we're going to chill. And it turns out that our management, quote unquote, had booked us to do 2 shows that night. We didn't know. So it's like, what, we're doing another set? And they're like, yeah, we're going to turn the audience over and you're booked to do another set. We were really pissed. And so I came down and we get on stage and we put our instruments on. And we're all these like geeks, right? And I'm like, hi, we're Tin Huey and this is radio. Blank you. And... or you can go blank yourselves. I don't remember which one it was. And because I was so aggressively mean, they loved us. Nick, it's like if we would do our gigs and just like spit on people all the time, we would have had a much bigger career.
Nick, did you consider the Bizarros to be a punk band?
No. Okay. No, we were just DIY like a lot of the other bands, and the Akron bands, I'm proud to say, were so different from each other. You had Devo, Pretenders, Tin Huey, Bizarros, Rubber City Rebels. I mean, in the Cleveland bands, like Perubu. I mean, you couldn't categorize any of us.
Right.
It's true.
I agree with that assessment. I that's why I asked. I think it is funny how punk as a genre has this, big, large platform, and yet so many bands that are identified as that or as being foundational are not at all. They're classically CBGBs. We've talked about television,
Talking Heads,
Blondie,
Talking Heads,
and Ramones. I mean, Ramones are the only one of those bands that really you could call punk. The rest of them, not
Richard
at all.
Hell.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah,
Voidoids.
Yeah.
I had a conversation not that long ago with one of the guys from the Rubber City Rebels. Oh no! You know what? It was a writer who's friends with the Rubber City Rebels. And we both know Doug Shepard, and he took what I said to him because I said to him he always considered the Rubber City Rebels a punk band, and I was like, I don't think any of us thought they were punk. We thought they were like very much an aggressive hard rock band.
Yeah, that's right.
And he went back to Buzz Click, I think, and said, "You know what Harvey Gold said?" And Buzz said, yeah, we weren't a punk band.
Right.
We weren't punks.
Right.
He wore a razor blade in his ear as an earring, but that was it.
Yeah, that was it. I was just accessorizing.
Well, and just as a PS to all this, you mentioned Richard Hell and the Voidoids, but that was more attitude and fashion. Because if you actually listen to those records, they're not really punk. They're pretty weird. They're way more complicated rhythmically.
That's because of his guitar player.
Robert Quine. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, when I was invited to join Tin Huey, we played a number of gigs.
We did a couple of what we called mini tours, mini tours, where we would play New York and play Cleveland.
Barberton.
Yeah, and they were fun shows. And for sure.
Barberton?
Yeah.
Or Copley.
Yeah.
Oh,
get on the bus, drive from Copley to Barberton, then to Wadsworth. Yeah. Crazy times.
Where are we? Where do you eat here?
Chicken.
Did we get a room?
Something Hungarian.
Chicken and hot rice.
What is this crap?
But Tin Huey ultimately came to an end because of health issues.
There was the 21st century Tin Huey did a lot of stuff. Interestingly, we had a couple health issues where Mark had cancer and Michael had to have a valve replacement, and somebody who
Not on
never
his tire was his heart, right?
Yeah.
yes somebody. We don't joke about things. Somebody, I don't think who doesn't get enough credit for it, Bob Effington, your host, put together a 2-day.
Oh, man.
Geez, it was a 2-day rock festival at the Lime Spider to raise money for those guys.
Nicked up Huey's benefit.
Nicked up Huey's benefit. I mean, one night was headlined by Tin Huey. We got everybody to play. The other night was headlined by the Black Keys.
Yeah, the Zorros were that night.
The Zorros
that
were.
night.
Yeah, I
Chai
mean,
Pig.
everybody just, it caused Chai Pig to get back together to play. Yeah. Everybody just sort of like really came together in a kind of a spectacular way.
It was fun. There was a lot of bands reformed that had, like Unify reformed.
Yeah.
The Difficult with Dave Giffel's band, they reformed. But then, like the Numbers Band played.
The Numbers Band, CD Truth played.
CD Truth, right.
It was really a wonderful couple of nights.
I have to say that was one of the most important historical musical events that ever happened in Akron, and not because we were there and our friends were there, but it really meant a lot. The purpose was wonderful. But the result, Bob's hard work and putting that together, I didn't know that he had anything to do with it.
Bob was the organizer.
Yeah, until a couple months ago.
I've been congratulated so many times for Bob's work. And, John Backdurf, who is, an award-winning writer.
Yeah,
still is.
Graphic artist.
He did the poster.
Did a poster for it.
And it was great.
Yeah. It's still,
in T-shirts. Yeah, those are probably... Yeah, those are collectible items now for sure. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for the nice comments. But yeah, that was a great night, and I think that it brought a lot of us back together. Mean, I think it kind of we got reacquainted with one another. I think that like our relationship with the Numbers Band kind of like was really revamped then, because we all got along so well, and it was kind of like. Any rivalries or anything that had been perceived or whatever over the years, that just all disappeared. It was
we have to credit Danny from, it was the Lime Spider at the time. Now it's a Lockview.
Yeah, Danny Bassone. Yeah.
Yeah, he really had a lot to do with it.
He did.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So,
so what ended up happening, because I know where this is leading, was when Tin Huey played the Rock Hall, the next day, we were all getting together over at Michael's, and Chris Butler said that there was a benefit being held at the Beachland Tavern for some sort of legal issue that was going on that related to the 1970 Kent shootings. And he said, I'm going to go up and contribute. Any of you guys want to go? And I was like, I'll go. That was it. It was me. Mm-hmm. So Dolly and I went up with Chris. Chris came over to my house. We worked up a duet of 2 or 3 songs, and in my driveway, and which included a little tiny toy Casio that I played on one song, and I think we did "Don't Worry About the Government" with that, and then guitar. And we went up to the Beachland, and before we played, it was like, well, what should we call ourselves? Well, I don't know, half Hueys, half what? And Chris was like, how about half Cleveland? So if you wear the white patent leather loafers, that's a half Cleveland. If you wear the white patent leather belt, that's a half Cleveland. If you wear both, don't talk to me. So anyway, that was our first gig as half Cleveland. And then that went on to be a band that could be very fluid. It could be a duet of ours. There were times that we played gigs where Michael and Stuart played with us. Mm-hmm. But we kept doing it. We were doing Chris's material, my material, Huey's material. Ultimately, it ended up solidifying at one point as a four-piece, which was you, me, Debbie Smith, Cahan now, from Chai Pig, and we did some gigs. Then Debbie had arthritis issues, and then the band reconfigured. Chris was living in New York and coming back. It reconfigured, and it became you, me, Mike Wilkinson, who had been in the May Company with David Giffels and Dave Rich, and Taylor McIntosh, who is the son of Tin Huey's very original sax player, Lockie. And Taylor came in as a sax player and a utility infielder.
Right.
And we did a lot of gigs and have, like, I think 23, iPhone videos on YouTube of us. But we had never really recorded anything until I decided to do a solo album.
Right.
And that was when, for my songs that we did, we recorded over at Stay Level Studios, Jeff Koval's place, which is a great studio.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah, you guys worked there. And so on my solo album, 4 of the songs are I credit how it's broken down to Half Cleveland. Because prior to that, Bob and Debbie and I, Bruce Hensel, who was an engineer, he engineered on Hotel California. He engineered Intervisions. He worked down at Criteria.
I think he worked with Steven Stills.
Yeah,
and Chris
he did
Hillman.
Manassas. Yeah, he was from Norton originally. Came up to visit and said to Debbie, because he ended up producing Chai Pig's Miami album. He said, Debbie, whatever you're up to now, I've got this new recorder. Let's get together and record. And she was just working with me and us. So we ended up doing a thing that we ended up jokingly calling Harvey in the Hall. And we recorded a few songs at my house. And I finished them up down in Florida, where he was from. So there was that project, which also ended up being credited as such on my solo album.
What was that one when we played with you and the Numbers Band at the Civic Theater that one time, and you had a EP for sale? That was a Half Cleveland. Was that live?
Oh, yeah. There was a show that we did for a friend of ours who was running the media department over at Tri-C. And he asked us to come up and do a show in their Wi-Fi cafe for his students to be able to record us. And they did, and the mix was okay. We were really good. It was kind of a semi-unplugged version.
Right.
And eventually we thought, well, this is stupid. We're Half Cleveland and we're doing all these gigs and we have nothing to offer people. So Chris and I went and got it remastered, and we released it as Half Cleveland live at the Wi-Fi Cafe, which you can still get on Bandcamp.
Well, I was just going to ask you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great. You ought to some of the things we're talking about. You should mention if they're still available, where you could purchase some of the.
Well, there's nothing available. Oh, well, my album, which came out on Smogvale Records, you can still go to Bandcamp and download it. Smogvale decided to close their doors this year.
Really?
Yeah, Frank has retired from the music business in that sense. No.
They put out a mammoth Peter Loeffner box set, and then they closed.
I think they used all their juice to do that. But at any rate, yeah. So what's going to end up ultimately happening is it's come back into my universe, and but you can still download it on Bandcamp, and if you write and ask to get a hard copy of it, I can do that. And it was being carried in the local record stores here, and it's at Amoeba out on the West Coast. But I haven't been a particularly good rack jobber, and I haven't been really servicing them.
So I am Bob Ethington here with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and our guest is Harvey Gold. And we've been going through his long and varied career in music and in video production. And we've gotten up through the band Half Cleveland. and then to his solo album that came out, was that 2019, 2018?
No, 2021, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not that long
Oh,
ago.
that reason. Okay. And even though I am playing drums on a lot of it, I highly endorse this album. You should check it out. It's got a lot of really good songs on it. But I'd like to, in the time that's remaining, talk about what music projects you are involved in currently.
Well, I no longer am really all that interested in having a Harvey Gold band as such, where I was doing what I always did, which was, sing lead on all or half of the tunes and play guitar and play keyboards and front the band. And Ralph Carney notoriously described me in an Akron Beacon Journal interview as leader guy, which I don't care for a whole lot. But this is a stage of my life where I find myself sort of in an ideal place. Mm-hmm. I am playing with a band that was actually part of the Akron sound, very definitely part of the Akron sound, called the Hi-Fis.
Right. Good if I played with them many times.
And I got brought in as the piano player. Mm-hmm. And for me as a musician, this is great because I'm playing with Chuck Keith, who is like a friend of mine for 50-some years, along with Denny Coyle. Actually, I was in a band with them once called Willie. But for half a minute, and we played at the Avalon once. But
well, I wonder why you guys didn't keep going with that name, Willie.
You stop. Chuck and I co-wrote a song that Tin Huey did. We wrote Sister Rose together.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's the one I forgot to bring.
It's okay. I play with the Hi-Fis, just trying to become a better piano player. My goal is, every time we have a new song to work on, I think, what would Nicky Hopkins do or Bill Payne of Little Feat if they only had 15% of their ability? Because I think I can hack that. And then I have, and I love playing with the guys, and we do gig probably once every month to 6 weeks, and it's much fun. We have also you can get it on Bandcamp. We have an EP, which is, I think, 6 songs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's called 6 by 5. There's 5 of us and 6 of them. And we're kind of working on doing releasing some live videos that we can mix down, that we're working on. So that's my piano playing universe. I'm just being a musician. And then the other side of it is a band that, guess who's in it? Bob. Which is just a really interesting one called Golems of the Red Planet, which is, we have a bass player by the name of Mark Allender, who is a weirdo. He is a John Zornophile. John Zorn, the jazz classical composer that's always been sort of in... always active and being noticed in the New York scene, and internationally.
Right.
Anyway, Zorn wrote a whole thing called The Masada, which is a book of like 500-some pieces of music that probably none of them fill more than 2 lines or 3 lines of staff paper. And he offers it up to the world to do what they want with it. Most people, pretty much almost all people, when they cover his stuff, in order to make it last more than 40 seconds, they do it as jazz musicians, and they do improvs. It's like, here's a sax solo, here's a piano solo. Not exclusively. There's some interesting things. But Mark, who I had gotten together to form a very short-term band with to play for a friend's Exotica-themed birthday party, said, how about if... I just think it would be really interesting to do John Zorn stuff, which is all based on Ashkenazi Jewish modalities, which are minor thirds. That would be perfect to be a surf band. And it kind of then got left to the leader guy here to put the band together. So it's him on bass, and it's Bob on drums, and our dear friend Matt Reese, who is a cellist, very fine cellist, joined us, and that made me really happy because I am only a fan of surf music up to about, my capacity is usually about 3 songs. Even my very favorite bands like Dave Rich's group,
Beyonders.
the Beyonderers, Purple Kniff. I mean, they're great, but after 3 or 4 songs, I'm pretty much ready to go eat. So it's a real challenge to be in a surf band. So we put a real interesting, you've heard it, Brad, it's a really interesting tilt on pretty much everything.
Doesn't sound anything like any surf band you've ever
Thank
heard.
you, Nick. That's what I wanted to hear. Our last tune, as Bob would recall, we decided that it came out being John Zorn meets the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, right.
But at any rate, I love that band because that's one where I'm just simply concentrating on playing guitar and composition.
Right.
You know.
Well, and it's also it's really a recording project.
We don't gig.
Yeah, so there's there's none of the pressure of going to a club, setting up. Frankly, people ask me all the time if we're ever going to play out, and I'm like, I don't think so, because it would be very logistically challenging.
We need a couple extra people to play. Butler has always said, if you need an extra guitar player, I'll come in.
We would need people to augment us, and just like balancing a cello with guitars and drums. I just see that as being pretty difficult.
But here's the thing. We've had conversations about this before. When you write music, when you're writing and you're arranging, you write for the band that you're in. You not only write for the number of instruments in it, you write for what you would do live if you played it, and you write for the capabilities of the people in the band.
Right.
If all you are doing is a recording project, you can try, it's not that easy, to think in terms of I can do anything. And I'm not just writing for a 4-piece, it's got to play this at Musica next week.
Right.
Right. So that's really kind of freeing. So that's what I like about it, Bob. And one of the things I like about it, and the fact is that of all the bands that I've been in, this one is in a very strange way more collaborative than any of the bands I've been in. And I really like that. We've gone slowly also because we had COVID and everybody's got schedules and other stuff they're doing. And so, at the end of the day, that's why I sort of proclaimed I don't really want to gig, because and it's true, it's been prophetic. We've been doing this for 3 years now maybe, and we've posted 6 songs and 1 music video. Look up Google Golems, GOLEMS of the Red Planet, and go to when you get to the webpage, go to the jukebox, and you can listen to any of the songs. You can buy them, you can listen to them, and then there's a music video that my wife and I did called to Mahalalel, which is really a fun video. But the point is that if being in a normal band, anybody in a band, if we were worrying about having enough tunes in our repertoire to be able to gig, we would have broken up by now. So I'm happy.
Yeah.
Thanks for being in all my bands.
You're welcome.
You're a good boy, Bob. Nick and I had a band for one show.
Pale Blue Eyes.
Pale Blue Eyes. And it was Dave Rich from the Beyonderers. It was Martin on drums from the Bizarros. Nick sang lead.
Alan.
And
Alan, your buddy.
Oh, Artie. Arthur Baranoff, who was the Tin Huey's original electric guitar player, played on bass. And we went to the Massillon Museum of Art, and we did a set of Velvet Underground tunes that people weren't playing mostly. We were doing stuff from the 3rd album. It was really fun. So
Harvey and Nick were in a band together.
We were. We rocked it, Nick. Hell.
Yeah, who's to say that the Akron music scene is incestuous? We probably have all played with one another at one time or the other, I guess.
Afterwards, Nick and I got a room in Massillon. It was nice.
We stayed there for 3 days.
We didn't see the sun.
Well, this has been a very interesting time. Very interesting to hear the story of Harvey Gold.
I don't know how interesting it was,
this.
but it was really fun hanging out with you guys.
Well, I found it interesting because for all the years that I've known you, which frankly probably is 45 years or something, going back to, this is another episode of around or from Akron and beyond that we'll be doing is about the just local record stores and stuff.
Where did we all meet today to come here?
A record store,
Time Traveler Records, the longest standing independent record store in the solar system.
But I remember Harvey from when he worked at Disc Records at Summit Mall.
Me too.
And anyone that went to that store kind of remembers it fondly because it was all these music geeks who all had their own specialties. And
it was High Fidelity, but we wore ties.
You could always find a Captain Beefheart album there.
Yeah,
always.
I was really getting into like really avant-garde jazz at that time, and I remember
we had Larry Clayman there,
and he always gave me good recommendations on stuff. Yeah.
And then we had a guy named Eric Nyam who knew all the big band stuff. He did charts for Stan Kenton. And we had people who were like monster classical people.
Your manager was
Tony Weaver was a big classical guy, and Ron Ritz was a big Fairport Convention English traditional guy.
I bought all the Django Reinhardt, Stefan Grappelli French pressings there.
It's funny the things you remember because I remember having lunch with Harvey and I believe it was Ron at Yanko's restaurant, now long defunct. And we were sitting there eating, and I remember Ron saying that he just couldn't understand the point of any music that didn't have singing in it. Like, what is even the point of it? And I was just sitting there and I was thinking, like, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
Really?
So like Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, pointless.
And Ron, may I remind you of the lyrics on 3 of the Deep Purple albums. That was an interesting time. Ron was a great guy, and I know that this is a very personal part of this, but I actually became sort of media email friends with Fairport Convention's drummer, Dave Maddox. And the first time I wrote him, I was like, I said it as well as I could, but it's like, do you know the name Ron? I won't say his last name. Wanting to know whether he might be getting stalked by him. And thankfully, he said, no, I don't. And it made me very happy.
You didn't have to make any calls to the authorities after that.
No.
Well, this has been From Akron and Beyond with Nick Nicholas. I'm Bob Ethington. Our guest was Harvey Gold, and thank you, and we'll see you next time.